Ashes of the Last Dragon. Prologue, a reckoning of flames. I can taste the rain on the wind, smell its electric tension coursing through the storm clouds roiling overhead. The Slayer approaches, his heartbeat drumming through the very stones below me, and I coil my body tight against the mountainside, talons carving into the ancient rock. My wings, battered and scarred from battles long past, stretch wide to blot out the lightning-tinged sky. He is close. I feel the heat of his blade even before I see him, steel forged by blood and alchemy. It glows with an unnatural brilliance, as if fueled by the greed and hatred of men. Perhaps it is. They have all come to fear my existence, twisting our ancient pacts into something hateful. They are determined to erase my kind from history. I will not let them forget the weight of this choice. The thunder cracks. In the strobing light, he stands at the edge of the precipice, a solitary figure against the swirling mists. For a moment, neither of us moves. My breath rumbles in my throat, stirring embers that dance around my fangs. I see in his eyes no hesitation, no doubt, only the cold, lethal resolve of a warrior come to slay a monster.
"Dragon,"
he calls, voice echoing off the cliffs.
"Your age ends tonight."
His words drive a spike of anger through my heart. We once lived in peace, human and dragon, bound by respect and treaties older than any mortal city. But ignorance and fear shattered that accord. Now, all I see is another human warrior, blade raised, carrying out the final blow in a war they do not fully understand. I roar, the thunder of my fury shaking loose stones from the crags. My spine tail whips around, and I leap from the rock shelf with talons extended. The Slayer's sword answers with a burst of white flame, crashing against my scaled chest. Pain crackles across my hide, but I force myself to surge forward, jaws snapping inches from his face. He ducks under my roar and slashes again, splitting scales that have never been pierced. The blade leaves a trail of searing agony along my side. Lightning flashes overhead, revealing the blood dripping from my wounds, a vivid, molten red that hisses when it hits the ground. "You cling to your illusions," I snarl, each word vibrating through the deep timbre of my throat. "You hunt me out of fear. You have unleashed something far worse than I could ever be." A swirl of cold wind whips around us, dragging the stench of decay from human battlegrounds far below. The world has grown sick with their wars, their plagues, their thirst for dominion, and yet they brand me the beast. My rage rumbles again, ancient, unstoppable, fueling a stream of black fire that pours from my jaws, bathing the clifftop in searing darkness. The Slayer does not falter. He steps through the conflagration with the blade held high, forging a path of brilliant light through my flames. My fire sputters against him, forced back by that cursed steel, magic twisted by human cunning, and an underworld pact I only half comprehend. The power resonates in my bones, telling me that this is the moment the world changes. I lash out with a wing, buffeting him against a jagged boulder. He smashes hard, dust pluming in the storm winds. For an instant, triumph flares in my chest. I rear back, exhaling in a ragged hiss, ignoring the hot lance of pain that throbs in my wounded side. A final blow, one more strike with tooth or talon, will end him. But the storm's next lightning bolt reveals him crouched, still gripping that blade. He springs forward with a roar that seems torn from the depths of the earth. My chest tightens in alarm as I see the weapon glowing, not just with human forging, but with an otherworldly aura, one that devours the darkness of my flames. In a single breath, he drives it deep beneath my scales, a searing eruption of light and agony exploding within me. I roar, louder, more desperate than any cry I have ever unleashed. My wings collapse, clawed feet scraping at the mountaintop. Blood and flames spill from my body, painting the stones in molten heat. I taste iron in the back of my throat. My vision blurs, each heartbeat echoing with a thunderous boom that distorts the world around me. He pulls the sword free, stumbling back. I see triumph in his eyes, but it is laced with horror as well, because he feels what I feel. A power far older than his forging, older than the hatreds of men. It vibrates through my scales, through the rock, through the storm. My life's essence is unraveling, and in its wake, it summons a force even I did not fully understand, the last vestige of my oath with the underworld lord. I collapse, tail thrashing weakly. My blood stains the Slayer's boots as he staggers away, shielding his eyes from the brilliance emanating from my cracked hide. I am dying, but I can still sense the hush of eternity as the pact blooms in the space between my final breaths. Ash and flame churn inside my body, expanding outward in a swirling storm that scalds the air. Through the haze of death, I remember why I agreed to this unholy covenant. Revenge. If humanity would not stop its hand in slaughtering my kind, then my demise would herald a plague that would haunt their kingdoms for generations to come. My vision fails. I see only flickers of black flame dancing across the Slayer's features, a kind of dread etched there. He realizes this was no simple kill, no easy end. He has cut down the last of my race, yes, but in so doing he has unleashed a poison upon the living that will fester in every corner of their realm. My ashes will spread, carrying the taint of the underworld, twisting souls, birthing nightmares. A final breath rattles in my throat. My heart falters. The Slayer dares a step closer, sword raised in a trembling hand, as if expecting one last strike. But I have no fire left to give. My limbs collapse and the storm rushes in, cold rain pelting my fractured scales. Everything is fading. A distant part of me sees the future as I slip into darkness, sees the human child who will one day find a piece of my shattered heart, sees the undercurrent of fate drawing him in. My vengeance will not rest. My ashes will roil across the land, and in those embers a new power will be born, the key to either saving humanity from itself or condemning it forever. I close my eyes. There is only silence. A heartbeat later, the mountain explodes in a bloom of black flame and cinder. A shockwave tearing across the cliffs, scattering my remains to the wind. Rain hisses against the embers. Far below, in villages already trembling under rumors of a new sickness, the first flakes of ash begin to fall, a slow gray drift carrying the echo of my fury. And thus I die, cursing the hearts of men, certain that my final breath will mark the world with a plague of nightmares. Let them believe they have won. My will endures in every grain of ash, and the darkness I have unleashed shall shape the fate of humankind. I am the last dragon, and my wrath is not so easily extinguished.
If you enjoyed that chapter, the flame lives in you too. New chapters drop every Sunday and Thursday at noon. Subscribe to stay close to the fire, and leave a comment. I want to know what you felt.
Ashes of the Last Dragon. Chapter 1. Cole's boots slapped against the sodden ground as he hurried through the winding lanes of Ferrowell. A bitter wind whistled between the cramped, timber-framed houses, carrying the scent of damp earth and the faint, unsettling tang of burning. Though no one openly mentioned it here out of fear, the rumors persist. The year was sometime in the 14th century, and yet, with the gloom in the air, it felt like the end of days. Ever since rumors of a horrible new plague spread across the countryside, Ferrowell had taken on a haunted, watchful silence. More than one villager had already succumbed to the fever, leaving bleak emptiness in households that once rang with lively chatter. The sickness was in the streets. He had already passed someone collapsed against a wall, shivering violently. Upon his return, a body was being quietly carted away. A few miles earlier, Cole had stood in the apothecary's cramped shop, his heart hammering in his chest as Mistress Helen, gaunt-faced and grim, handed him a small pouch of pungent herbs. He clung to that pouch now, as though it were a precious jewel, for it might be all that stood between his sister, Lily, and a swift, terrible end. He had left home at daybreak, the moment he realized Lily's cough had gone from a mild tickle to something rasping and violent. The rumor was that once that cough settled into a person's lungs, they had scant days, if not hours, to live. The plague had raged for only a few short weeks, but its velocity seemed unstoppable. Passing under a stone arch near the center of the village, he glimpsed movement in the corners of his eye. Neighbors, their faces drawn, peered from behind shutters and half-open doors. He avoids eye contact out of guilt. If people knew Lily was sick, he was sure they'd turn on him. Every sound, a sneeze, a wheeze, a ragged exhale, seemed to echo unnaturally against the stone walls. Nobody wanted to step onto the streets unless they absolutely had to. Several folks had already lost relatives, and the rest huddled in fear, waiting for the next sign of sickness to appear. Cole quickened his pace, determined to get back to Lily as fast as his legs would carry him. He couldn't help replaying the last conversation he'd had with Mistress Helen just an hour before, her voice subdued, her eyes mirroring his own dread.
"I've tried everything I know,"
she'd whispered, pushing the pouch into his hands.
"This is stronger than willow bark, might help with fever and coughing. But Cole, if things worsen, I have one last remedy I can bring."
She lowered her gaze.
"If none of this helps Lily, you'll need to find someone with deeper knowledge, someone who uses unusual methods. There is an alchemist in the next village."
In Highmill, he was rumoured to deal in dark or forbidden practices. If Mistress Helen was referring him outright, things were indeed dire. Cole inhaled, tasting the smoky tang that drifted through Farewell's alleyways. Word had spread that some towns had resorted to burning corpses to stop the contagion from spreading. Whether that was the source of the acrid smell, or if it came from hearth fires kept blazing to ward off disease, he couldn't tell. He only knew it conjured images of blackened bodies on makeshift pyres, enough to send his stomach twisting in revulsion. He prayed, desperately, that Lily would not suffer that fate. His was near home with a sweat despite the cold. At last, he reached the small wooden door of his home, breath catching in his throat. A battered sign, his father's old blacksmith crest, hung crookedly near the entrance. The blackened hammer and anvil symbol felt like a cruel reminder. His father had died 2 years prior in a tragic forge accident. Not long after, his mother had slipped away, leaving him and Lily behind in quiet despair. He paused, wrestling with the latch, heart pounding a frantic cadence. 1,000 times he had asked himself why their mother had gone, whether heartbreak, fear of poverty, or something darker had driven her away. Whatever the reason, he'd been forced to assume responsibilities far beyond his 18 years. He finally pushed the door open. The interior was dim, lit by a single oil lamp near the small hearth. A wave of stale, feverish heat greeted him. In the far corner, separated by a thin, tattered curtain for meager privacy, he heard Lily's laboured breathing, a weak, rasping sound that seized him with dread. Before he could reach her bedside, Miss Rosley rose from where she knelt, wringing out a cloth in a basin of cloudy water. She was in her late 20s, her hazel eyes underscored by deep shadows of fatigue. She had lost her father to this same plague only a week ago, yet here she was, tending Lily without a trace of hesitation. She had been a near-constant presence in Cole and Lily's life ever since their mother vanished, doing her best to fill the gap left by absent parents. Because Miss Rosley had no remaining family of her own, she threw herself into helping Cole and Lily as though they were her kin. In a way, they were. Pain had bound them together.
"Cole,"
Ms. Rosley greeted softly, brushing back loose strands of tawny hair from her face.
"I'm so glad you're back. She's getting worse."
Her voice trembled as she placed the cloth on Lily's forehead.
"I tried to keep the fever down, but it keeps climbing."
Cole's insides lurched at the sight of Lily sprawled on the thin mattress. Her cheeks flushed a dark crimson from fever, yet her lips tinged an unsettling blue. Her hair, damp with sweat, clung to her forehead in tangled curls. She coughed, an awful rattling sound, and Miss Rosley flinched, as though it were her own lungs tearing.
"Thank you,"
Cole murmured, stepping closer. He knelt by the bedside, carefully lifting Lily's head.
"I brought this."
He said, showing Miss Rosley the pouch of herbs.
"Mistress Helen says it may buy us some time, maybe keep the fever under control."
Miss Rosley's eyes shone with hope and dread in equal measure.
We'll try anything.
She moved aside to give him room. Cole scooped a small portion of the bitter-smelling mixture into a cup of lukewarm water, stirring until the liquid turned a murky brown. Holding Lily's head with one hand, he gently tipped the cup to her lips, coaxing her to drink. Each swallow seemed a battle, as though her throat fought to reject every drop. When Lily sank back against the pillow, her eyelashes fluttering, Ms. Rosley pressed the cloth to her forehead again. Cole noticed the new lines of worry etched around Ms. Rosley's mouth. She was only in her late 20s, yet sorrow had aged her in the last few days.
She hasn't eaten.
Ms. Rosley said quietly.
Barely any water stays down. She's exhausted, Cole. And her cough.
She trailed off, letting the dire truth settle in the air between them. Cole set the cup aside with trembling fingers. The pungent aroma of the herbs clung to the small room, mingling with the stale odor of sweat and illness.
"We'll keep trying,"
he forced out, more to reassure himself than Ms. Rosley. "I won't let her go like this." Ms. Rosley sighed, offering him a pained smile.
She's strong, Cole. Just like you. She won't give in easily.
He wanted to believe that, needed to believe it. But every laboured breath Lily took reminded him that time was running out. Images of the bodies carried through Farewell's streets just days before resurfaced in his mind. Sheets stained with blood, the hushed sobs of loved ones trailing behind the carts. He swallowed hard, focusing on Lily's shallow rise and fall of her chest. He could not, would not, lose her. Rising stiffly, he looked around the cramped space. Their home was meagre, a single main room with a small hearth for cooking and warmth, plus a sagging cot in the corner that used to belong to their father. A worn curtain separated Lily's sleeping space to offer a fraction of privacy. The one small window near the door let in a sliver of greyish daylight, giving everything a pale, sickly cast.
Cole,
Ms. Rosley ventured, following his gaze.
there's something else. People say the plague is far worse in the villages beyond Farewell. They talk about towns, burning the dead to stop the spread.
Her face pinched with worry.
I don't know if it's true, but I overheard a traveller who claimed that in Oaksford, pyres burned day and night. He said the ashes fell like a faint snowfall for hours.
Cole felt his pulse quicken. Days earlier, he'd heard a snippet of the same rumour. Something about entire families lost. Ashes drifting on the breeze in Highmill. The plague devouring everything it touched.
"Mistress Helen told me about an alchemist in Highmill,"
he said, fighting to keep his voice steady.
"She hinted that if Lily doesn't improve soon, we might have to try more extreme measures. Maybe that means travelling to Highmill myself. If the local remedies won't help her, I have no choice."
Miss Rosley's brow creased.
But the roads are dangerous now. People avoid travelling unless it's absolutely necessary. Some say there are more than just sickness and desperate refugees on the routes. They say brigands have taken advantage. But who can say if it's just fear talking?
He remembered how Mistress Helen had lowered her voice when she mentioned the alchemist. There was a sense of dread attached to that name, as if the man toyed with arts better left alone. But if those arts could save Lily... Cole pushed the thought of danger aside.
"I'd face worse than brigands if it meant saving her,"
he said with quiet resolve, eyes never leaving Lily's form.
"I'll go if I must."
Miss Rosley dipped her head in agreement.
I knew you would.
She hesitated, then placed a gentle hand on his shoulder.
Your father would be proud. You're doing what you can.
Cole closed his eyes for a moment, a surge of grief lancing through him. In his mind's eye, he saw his father at the forge, shaping molten iron with expert blows, smoke rising in swirling plumes, sparks dancing across the air. How many times had he stood at his father's side, marveling at his skill? He'd been barely 16 when the accident happened. A flying shard of superheated metal had pierced his father's neck. The memory still made him shudder. And his mother? She had slipped away shortly after, a ghost leaving no trace. Grief, or desperation, or something else. He never knew.
Dad,
He whispered, half under his breath.
I wish you were here.
Even as the words left him, he knew there'd be no response, just the faint crackle of the hearth and Lily's strained breathing. Time ticked by with agonizing slowness. Ms. Rosley busied herself mixing more water and herbs, checking Lily's forehead, speaking in hushed tones to soothe her feverish moans. Cole hovered between them, feeling utterly powerless. He wanted to gather Lily in his arms and make the sickness vanish by sheer will. He wanted to lash out at whatever dark force had unleashed this plague on the world. The fact that rumors pointed to entire regions grappling with the same devastation only deepened his despair. If skilled physicians and wise men throughout Europe were helpless, how could he, an 18-year-old with a meager stash of coins, do better? Yet he refused to surrender. Hours crawled by, marked by Lily's fits of coughing. She trembled, sometimes muttering incoherently, as though drifting in and out of feverish dreams. Ms. Rosley swapped the damp cloth on Lily's head whenever it grew warm, but nothing fully eased her suffering. Outside, twilight descended. The sky, a bruised swirl of purples and greys. A few distant torches flickered along Ferrowell's main road. Cole glanced through the narrow window, noting the hush that had fallen over the village. It wasn't just the hush of evening. This was the hush of dread, when everyone locked their doors, praying they wouldn't be next. A sharp rapping at the door startled him. Cole tensed, exchanging a look with Ms. Rosley. Visitors were rare these days. Most people avoided others, as though even a friendly hello could spread the plague. Edging to the entrance, Cole eased it open a crack. Outside stood Mistress Helen herself, her face lined with worry.
I had to come,
She said softly, stepping into the house. She carried a bundle in her arms.
The gossip around town is that Lily's taken ill. I brought more supplies, and
She handed over a small jar of foul-smelling paste.
rub this on her chest. It might loosen the phlegm in her lungs.
Cole's throat tightened with gratitude.
You didn't have to.
I did.
Mistress Helen cut him off, her voice trembling with fierce empathy.
Your father fixed my father's plough once without charging a coin because we were struggling for food that winter. I won't forget that kindness.
She looked to Lily, her lips pursed.
How is she?
Ms. Rosley responded, voice subdued.
No real change. The fever won't break.
Mistress Helen nodded, stepping close to Lily's bedside. She peered at the girl's face, gently lifted Lily's eyelids, then let out a slow exhale.
I'm sorry.
She said, turning to Cole, checking him for signs of infection.
I'm doing all I can, but this sickness, it devours people from the inside. You must be prepared.
Cole braced himself, forcing steel into his voice.
We're not giving up. If she's still like this by dawn, I'm going to High Mill. Maybe that alchemist can help.
Mistress Helen didn't argue.
That might be best. The roads are risky, but if you've the courage, it could save her.
She paused, adjusting her shawl.
I've heard they burn the fallen over there to keep the spread at bay, and some say that the ashes themselves carry the sickness.
A grim hush followed her words. No one knew if that rumor was truth or superstition, but the fear was real enough. He realized this when Mistress Helen wiped her hands after handing Cole the medicine, just before he departed the apothecary. Ms. Rosley stared down at the floorboards, remembering her father's final hours. Cole thought of the travelers' hushed stories, how in some parts of the land, it wasn't just the stench of burning, but a haze of grey drifting through the air, settling on rooftops and fields, as if the entire countryside lay under a toxic blanket. The idea turned his stomach, but if High Mill was where the alchemist lived, he had to go there regardless. Mistress Helen set the jar of paste on a rough-hewn table near Lily's bed.
Apply it every few hours,
She said, gentler now.
If you need more, I'll leave it near my door.
Cole dipped his head in acknowledgement, feeling a whirlwind of emotion, gratitude, fear, and an urgent sense that dawn couldn't come soon enough.
Thank you.
He repeated. He escorted Mistress Helen outside, where the night air felt sharper, more hostile. She left quickly, shoulders hunched as though anticipating an unseen threat. Returning inside, Cole found Ms. Rosley wiping Lily's face. The lamp's flame flickered, dancing across Lily's damp skin. Her breath came in stuttering, uneven gasps. Just get through the night, he thought fiercely. He knelt again, rubbing the pungent paste onto Lily's chest. The scent made his eyes water, but if it could loosen the death grip on her lungs, it was worth any discomfort. Minutes blurred into hours. Ms. Rosley dozed upright in a corner for a brief moment, head lolling to the side, while Cole maintained a silent vigil. Every so often, Lily coughed, rattling the hush. The flame in the oil lamp guttered, requiring him to trim the wick and add a bit more oil. In the gloom, he felt cut off from the world beyond these walls. Only the plague existed, monstrous and unrelenting. He raked a hand through his disheveled dark hair, glancing at Lily's face. Though her cheeks were flushed, the rest of her skin looked pallid and wan. Her lips had a cracked dryness to them. He forced more water into her mouth, leaning her head carefully and massaging her throat to encourage swallowing. She moaned but didn't wake. Guilt stabbed him. He was powerless, forced to watch her waste away. In a low voice, Cole finally confided in Ms. Rosley, who had stirred from her light nap.
In the morning, I'll leave early,
He said, husky from exhaustion.
if you'll stay with her.
Ms. Rosley nodded, eyes red from lack of sleep.
I'll stay as long as it takes.
She vowed.
It's me and you, Cole. We protect Lily. I must step out tomorrow to check on a couple of my neighbours, friends of my dad. It won't be long. I'll remain with her.
He squeezed her hand. The house fell quiet again, aside from Lily's laboured breaths. Outside, a dog barked somewhere in the distance, followed by tense silence. Were the neighbours awake too, battling the same illness behind their locked doors? Cole fought to stay awake, pacing the small interior to keep his blood flowing. He checked Lily's temperature repeatedly, applying fresh, cool cloths to her forehead. Every moment felt stolen from a relentless clock. If dawn would only hurry, then he could dash to High Mill, find the alchemist, and return with something stronger than these meagre herbs. He pictured Lily healthy again, scolding him for being so serious. The memory put a slight tremor in his hands as he wrung out another cloth. When the first light of day finally broke through the window, it revealed Lily in the same tortured state. Her breathing had not improved. If anything, it had grown more shallow, more ragged. Cole couldn't delay. With bleary eyes, he gathered the meagre coins he possessed and what few valuables might be traded: his father's old blacksmith chisel, a small hammer, some leftover metal scraps. They could be bartered if coin alone failed. Ms. Rosley, eyes heavy-lidded, helped him bundle the items into a sturdy sack.
You'll be careful?
She asked, her voice wavering.
I've heard the roads are, well, not as safe as they used to be.
Cole hoisted the sack over one shoulder. The weight felt meagre compared to the crushing worry in his heart.
I'll be fine. I have nothing worth stealing except time, and that was already slipping away. I always travel with my father's hammer when leaving town,
he assured her, though his chest felt hollow.
Look after Lily. Make sure she keeps taking the herbs, and apply the paste. If there's any sign of improvement,
I'll send someone to find you.
Miss Rosley finished, offering a thin smile.
Don't worry about that. Just hurry back.
He nodded, stepping to Lily's bedside one last time. Leaning in, he pressed his forehead lightly to hers, feeling the heat radiating off her fevered skin.
hold on.
He whispered.
I'm not leaving you behind. I'll bring back a cure, and this will just be a bad memory.
Her eyes remained closed, her mouth parted in shallow breaths. Cole's heart ached at how frail she looked, barely more than a child, battered by forces she had no power to fight. He found himself blinking back tears as he straightened. Ms. Rosley gently rested a hand on his arm.
She's strong, and she has us.
She said.
Go.
Cole inhaled, steadying himself. With a final nod, he crossed to the door, stepping into the pale morning light. An unseasonable chill hung in the air, underscoring the tension that had claimed all of Farewell. Sparing no time, he began his journey along the narrow dirt road that led toward the next village. The houses behind him looked bleary and forlorn in the dawn glow, silent witnesses to a mounting crisis. Somewhere, a rooster crowed half-heartedly, as though uncertain the day was worth greeting. His mind churned with questions. Could the alchemist's knowledge truly save Lily? Would he arrive soon enough to make a difference? What if the plague was unstoppable? Yet he forced these doubts aside, focusing on each purposeful step. For Lily's sake, he had to try. A glimmer of hope flared within him. Though overshadowed by dread, it was enough to push him forward. As he cleared the last row of houses, the air felt heavier, thick with something unseen. A faint grey dust clung to his sleeves, so light he almost didn't notice. He brushed it off absently, but the act left a lingering unease. Whether it was smoke from distant pyres or just morning mist, he couldn't say. With a resolute breath, Cole clutched the strap of his sack, determined to find the remedy no matter what horrors or truths lay ahead. Lily's life depended on it, and if the rumours were true, if the dead were truly burned in the next town, and ash spread across the land, he would face that grim reality head-on. In the hush of early morning, he left Farewell behind, stepping into a world that felt on the brink of collapse. Yet inside him, a fierce resolve took root. He would not let Lily become another casualty. No matter how many miles he had to walk, no matter how frightening the stories of the plague grew, he would return. And in that determination, he found the first spark of defiance against the darkness threatening to swallow them all.
To support the growth of this book, subscribe and share it with someone who you think would enjoy a dark fantasy novel. Click like and the notification button to be the first to hear new chapters every Sunday and Thursday at noon, and leave a comment. Tell me what direction you would like the story to go.
Ashes of the Last Dragon. Chapter 3. Following the Ashes. Outside, High Mill's market had grown more crowded in his brief absence, a flurry of hushed bargaining and guarded glances. Vendors hawked their wares with little enthusiasm, their voices subdued. Children gathered by a small fountain, but their giggles were subdued, fleeting. Now and then, a stray cough would make people recoil, as though the sound itself could carry death. As Cole threaded his way past stalls of onions, root vegetables and stale bread, he overheard more snippets of anxious conversation.
The stranger was definitely heading for Oxford, wasn't he?
He said something about seeing those ashes for himself. But who'd want to chase that kind of misery?
Desperate times, maybe. Or a fool's errand.
Cole's pulse pounded. Each rumour only tightened the knot of fear coiled in his stomach. He forced himself to move faster, ignoring the uncertain stares. Lily was foremost in his mind. Every second counted. Following the shopkeeper's directions led him beyond the main bustle of the market, past a series of small, crowded huts whose inhabitants peered out at him. After 2 more turns, he finally came upon the alchemist's domain, a squat, stone structure with an uneven roof and a lean-to at its side packed with stacked firewood. Thin threads of greenish smoke curled from a crooked chimney, adding a sharp, herbal tang to the air. Cole rapped on the heavy wooden door, tension clawing at him. If the man inside could not help Lily, he didn't know where else to turn. It swung open, revealing a wiry man with ink-stained fingertips, his apron pockets stuffed with dried leaves, small tools, and vials of unknown substances. His eyes, sharp and assessing, flicked over Cole in an instant.
You're here about medicine, I presume?
Cole nodded.
My sister is gravely ill. The usual herbs didn't help.
The alchemist gestured him inside, glancing around as though wary of eavesdroppers. The interior was cramped, dominated by a large work table strewn with pestles, mortars, and half-labeled jars of powders. Shelves covered every wall, filled with coils of dried roots, bundles of twigs, and the occasional bottled specimen in murky liquid. A pungent odor hovered in the air, part rot, part spice, part unknown.
I can mix something stronger,
the alchemist said, waving Cole over to a rickety stool.
It's not a guaranteed cure, but some families say it eases the symptoms, buys time at least.
A flicker of something like compassion crossed his face.
I won't lie to you. This plague is beyond anything I've seen, but I'm no monster. If you can cover my cost for ingredients, we'll try.
Cole let out the breath he'd been holding.
I have coins,
he said, pulling out the meager handful he'd earned at Fallow's General Goods.
And a bit more if needed. Just, please.
The alchemist nodded and returned to his work table, already gathering leaves of varying shapes, powdered minerals, and a flask of thick, amber liquid.
We'll sort out the final payment once I see how much of each reagent is required.
He paused to toss a suspicious glance at Cole's anxious stance.
It'll take an hour or two, maybe more, to get the proportions right and let them steep. Best if you come back later, rather than watch me fuss over the brew.
Cole swallowed, dismayed by the delay but unsurprised.
All right, but please be quick. She's alone.
The alchemist gave a curt nod, already crushing some leafy stems in a mortar.
I've heard the rumors too. Oaksford's pyres, falling ash. This plague's unpredictable. All I can offer is a fighting chance.
A fighting chance is all she needs,
Cole repeated, more to reassure himself than the alchemist. He trudged back outside. The midday sun felt almost oppressive, as though the sky weighed heavy with judgment. He drew in a shaky breath, trying to calm the swirl of terror in his gut. Lily's time was slipping away, yet he had no choice but to wait. As he turned to leave, Cole's gaze drifted toward the distant tree line beyond the village. A faint haze seemed to hover above it, too thick and dark to be normal morning mist. His thoughts shot back to the rumors about Oaksford, the talk of a stranger chasing drifting ash, and the shopkeeper's mention of how the ashes had begun some months ago, not necessarily from mere funeral pyres. His eyes narrowed, catching what looked like a thin column of ash or smoke rising among the dense canopy. It was strangely localized, not dispersed like typical bonfire smoke. A slow chill crept up his spine. If there was any truth to the notion that these ashes might be linked to the plague in a deeper way, then ignoring that clue could cost Lily her life. At odds with himself, Cole weighed the options. He needed to stay near the alchemist to retrieve Lily's remedy as soon as it was ready. But the man had told him to return in a couple of hours. If that strange haze in the woods offered answers, maybe it was worth a quick investigation. The memory of Lily's pale face bobbed in his mind. She's counting on me. If these ashes were more than just burned corpses, if they heralded some grim truth behind the disease, then perhaps knowledge could help him fight it. The time spent might lead to answers no one else had. He steeled himself.
I'll be back soon,
he murmured, nodding at the alchemist's chimney as though the man could hear him through the walls. Tightening his cloak, he headed toward the forest at a brisk walk. The acrid smell on the breeze grew stronger the closer he got to the tree line, stirring unease in his gut.
Cole stood at the edge of High Mill, gazing down the winding path that vanished into a wall of towering pines. A faint haze clung to the tree line, visible even in the early afternoon light. Though the villagers insisted this forest was best avoided, Cole's decision was made. The alchemist needed time, 2 hours, perhaps more, to brew the stronger remedy for Lily. Every fibre of his being urged him to stay close so he could race home with the cure. But that distant plume of ash called to him, and a quiet intuition insisted he might learn something vital if he simply followed it. He tightened his grip on his father's hammer, its worn wooden handle smooth against his palm. The hammer's head bore tiny nicks, remnants of years spent in the forge. Even in the open air, the faint smell of iron and soot lingered on the metal. As a boy, he'd watched his father use it to shape farm tools and horseshoes with calm mastery. Now, it served as his sole defense, and a cherished memento of all he had lost. Beyond the outskirts of High Mill, the land sloped gently downward. Dry grass gave way to scattered thickets until the main dirt track dissolved into a tangle of roots and underbrush. Before him, ancient pines and oaks formed a dark canopy that seemed to blot out the sky in places. A hush settled in the air, broken only by the occasional call of a distant bird. Cole paused to take stock of his surroundings. A faint breeze ruffled his cloak, carrying with it a whiff of something acrid, like burnt embers. He wasn't certain if the smell came from Oaksford's pyres, rumoured to be somewhere east, or from the mysterious source of ashes he'd noticed earlier. Regardless, he steeled himself and stepped under the shadowy boughs, each footfall stirring the thick carpet of pine needles.
To help this story grow, subscribe and share it with someone who lives for dark fantasy. Tap like and hit the bell to catch new chapters every Sunday and Thursday at noon. And tell me in the comments, where do you want the ashes to fall next?
Ashes of the Last Dragon. Chapter 4. Into the Southern Woods. Almost immediately, the world seemed to close in around him. The rays of sunlight filtering through branches were thin, casting fragmented patterns on the forest floor. Moss-cloaked trunks loomed on all sides, each tree seeming older than the last. Thick roots jutted from the ground, forcing Cole to pick his way carefully to avoid twisting an ankle. Unbidden memories flickered through his mind. Whispered village tales of travellers who ventured into these woods never to return. Rumours of wild beasts, or worse. His heart quickened, but he reminded himself that most stories were born of fear. Reality often proved less dramatic, still dangerous, but not guaranteed doom. His father's hammer swung stiff in his hand with each step, a comforting weight that grounded him. He found a narrow, meandering deer trail, likely forged by animals weaving between the oaks. Though overgrown, it offered some guidance. Cole followed it deeper into the forest, every sense sharpened by anticipation. Leaves rustled overhead in a gentle current of wind, and once or twice he glimpsed small creatures. A fox darting behind a trunk, a startled hare bounding away. Otherwise, the woods remained unsettlingly silent. The further he went, the more he sensed something unnatural in the air, a prickling tension. It was subtle, nothing he could pinpoint exactly. Perhaps it was merely the knowledge that a man had once emerged from these same shadows before heading to a plague-ravaged town. Perhaps it was the recollection of Lily's feverish cough and the urgent reminder that he had only so much time before the alchemist finished his brew. Yet, despite his apprehension, Cole pressed on. The hammer's handle grew warmer in his palm from his tightened grip. His mouth felt dry, and he paused once to sip water from his skin, keeping an ear out for any unusual noises. Only the breeze through the branches answered, carrying faint swirls of ash motes that caught the sunlight in drifting silvery specks. Near what must have been the forest's heart, the trees stood even closer, their immense trunks forming a natural barrier to the day's light. The air here carried the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Then, through the perpetual dimness, Cole spotted something out of place. A dull, black and bluish glow emanating from beyond a cluster of ancient pines. He froze, breath catching in his throat. No fire could burn that color, he thought. Yet there it was, a wavering luminosity, half obscured by shifting branches. Fear mingled with curiosity, and Cole eased himself forward, heart pounding. As he rounded a particularly thick oak, he saw it clearly, a pool of swirling ash, faintly lit by black and dark blue flames. They roiled at the center of a small clearing, tracing the outline of something large and half-buried. No heat radiated from the flames, yet they danced and flickered like coals in a blacksmith's forge. The acrid odor he'd picked up at High Mill was stronger here, tinged with a strange metallic edge. Tiny motes of ash drifted upward, carried by an invisible current into the canopy. Cole inched closer, pulse thrumming at his temples. He clutched his father's hammer tightly, though he wasn't certain it would be of any use if this phenomenon turned hostile. Up close, he could see the source of the glow more clearly, a molten, smouldering ball of ashes and charred material, shot through with threads of ghostly blue light. There was no sign of a campsite or evidence of a proper fire pit. This isn't someone's bonfire, he realized with a jolt. What is it? Only when he stood a few paces away did Cole spot a shard in the midst of the dark flames, like a large ember, but solid, almost crystalline in appearance. It pulsed with an otherworldly radiance, drawing his eye despite a surge of warning in his gut. The unnatural swirl of ash coiled around it, as though the shard were both the center and the cause of all this strangeness. His head swam with questions. Could this be the source of the ashes drifting over the land? Is this why that mysterious man came through these woods months ago? The swirl of black and grey dust fluttered around his boots, and though the air was cold, a tingling warmth spread through his veins, as though some quiet energy had reached out to greet him. Crouching carefully, Cole extended a hesitant hand toward the sphere of dark flame. No wave of heat blasted him. If anything, the air felt even cooler. Still, the flickering light danced and pulsed, as though beckoning him closer. He glanced around, fully expecting someone, or something, to emerge from behind a tree. But the clearing remained empty. I have to be quick, he told himself. I still need to get the cure and return to Lily. Yet he found himself unable to look away from the shard. What if this had something to do with the plague or the spread of ashes? Could it hold answers that might help Lily? Gritting his teeth, Cole braced for a rush of pain or heat as he reached over the molten mass. But the cold, dark flames licked harmlessly around his fingers, leaving a tingle on his skin like a mild electric charge. His heart thundered. Slowly he closed his hand around the shard, feeling it solid in his grip, cool to the touch, with a faint internal vibration. It was as though the world held its breath for that singular moment. Cole wavered on his feet, a surge of unfamiliar energy jolting up his arm, searing through his senses. Yet there was no scalding burn, no actual harm. Instead, there was a sudden awareness, a weightless feeling in his chest, and an echoing stillness that made his ears ring. Just as quickly as it began, the swirling sphere of ashes collapsed into itself, shrinking until only a small circle of fine dust remained on the ground. The flickering blue-black flames guttered out, leaving behind a faint afterglow in the clearing. Cole staggered back, clutching the shard in one hand, his father's hammer in the other. His breath came in ragged bursts, and his heart pounded as if it might leap from his chest. What just happened? His entire body hummed with subdued energy, like a taut bowstring waiting to snap. Yet outwardly, the woods remained unchanged. No monstrous roar, no blazing inferno, only the gentle drip of dew slipping from leaves and the hush of distant birds. Cole eased the shard into an inner pocket of his cloak. Whatever he held, it felt impossibly significant and impossibly dangerous. He cast one last look at the clearing. That glowing mass, so undeniably alien, had vanished, leaving no sign of its existence save for an ashy residue on the forest floor. A shaky breath escaped him. He realized that, in the bizarre stillness, he'd almost forgotten Lily's plight. The alchemist, he told himself firmly. I have to get back. If this shard was connected to the plague's spread, perhaps it could help him understand more later. For now, Lily came first. With renewed urgency, Cole gripped the hammer's handle and retraced his path through the woods. Though fear still gnawed at him, each step felt somehow lighter, as though that strange energy now thrummed along his nerves. A swirl of doubt and wonder clouded his thoughts. He had discovered something truly extraordinary. But was it salvation or a curse? For all the tales he'd heard of the plague, no one had ever mentioned cold flames or shards that pulsed with eerie life. What have I stumbled into, he wondered. Yet he had no time to dwell on the question. He emerged from the tree line, blinking in the brighter daylight as High Mill came into view once more. Smoke still billowed from the alchemist's chimney. Cole started forward at a brisk pace, Father's hammer reassuringly thumping his thigh. In his cloak pocket, the shard felt heavier than its small size should allow, a physical reminder that his world had just shifted forever. I need to get Lily's cure, he told himself, then figure out what on earth I just found. The eerie hush of the forest stayed with him, lingering in the corners of his mind as he hurried to retrieve the alchemist's remedy for Lily, and to keep the terrifying secret of the ashes hidden until he could make sense of it himself.
Ashes of the Last Dragon, a dark fantasy by Kevin Harger. The deeper you go, the darker it burns. Subscribe now and step further into the fire.
Ashes of the Last Dragon. Chapter 5. A Hopeful Return. Cole strode back into High Mill with the afternoon sun dipping behind the windmill's tall silhouette. As he passed the last row of houses, his mind returned to the cool, dark shard hidden in his cloak. Yet as soon as he spotted the alchemist's hut, its chimney still breathing out thin ribbons of smoke, his focus snapped to Lily. Whatever mystery he'd stumbled upon in the forest would have to wait. He opened the alchemist's door to find the wiry man hunched over a table, carefully decanting a bubbling liquid from a stone mortar into a small, thick-walled flask. The potent brew glowed faintly in the dim workshop, swirling with fine particles of ground herbs and unknown reagents. The alchemist exhaled in relief when he spotted Cole.
There you are. I was about to try looking for you. Time is critical when dealing with this plague.
Cole approached the table, heart pounding at the sight of the finished concoction.
I went for a brief walk,
he lied, unwilling to share the truth of his forest excursion.
Is it ready?
Yes, just now,
the alchemist replied, corking the flask and wiping his brow with a stained rag.
But remember, this isn't guaranteed to cure your sister. It should bring her fever down and help with breathing. If she responds well, she may live long enough for her body to fight off the sickness.
Cole nodded, swallowing hard. He set what coins he had left on the table. It amounted to a small pile, barely enough for the day's wages in normal times, but hopefully enough to cover the materials.
Thank you,
he said quietly. The alchemist counted the coins with pursed lips.
This will do,
he conceded.
Though if you can gather more of certain herbs in the future, I might be able to refine the mixture. But go now. Time is of the essence.
Cole grasped the flask, feeling its warmth radiate through the glass.
I'm grateful,
he murmured.
I'll never forget this.
Without waiting for further conversation, he tucked the precious container into a padded pocket in his satchel and slipped back outside. The sun was still high, not yet painting the sky in the red and gold it had been in the passing days. He didn't want to risk traveling after dark, but the thought of Lily waiting spurred him into action. If he managed the same haste he had in his arrival to High Mill, he could return to Farewell, while light from the sun still lit the edges of the night sky. He feared she might have declined even further in his absence. He left High Mill behind in long, purposeful strides, retracing the route that led northwest toward his home. As he walked, he noticed how quiet everything seemed. When he first came this way, there had been distant birdsong, an occasional cart rumbling past, and the murmurs of cautious travellers. Now, only the faint hiss of wind over the fields accompanied him. It was as though the world held its breath, matching his own sense of urgency. Yet, despite the eerie silence, Cole felt a strange vigour in his steps. Gone was the dread that weighed him down when he first set out, replaced by a fierce need to see Lily safe. Whether it was the lingering effect of whatever happened in the woods, or simply the rush of hope, he didn't know. He pressed on, father's hammer at his hip, tapping lightly against his thigh with each determined stride. He reached a familiar bend in the road, where an old oak tree stood, its branches twisting skyward. The evening shadows stretched long, and he quickened his pace. A prickling in the back of his mind reminded him of the shard hidden in his cloak, but he forced it aside. Lily was all that mattered.
Hold on,
he whispered into the soft dusk.
I'm coming back, just like I promised.
Nightfall had settled fully by the time Cole finally saw the humble rooftops of Ferrowell, peeking through the gloom. Dim lanterns glimmered behind shuttered windows, and the village seemed as subdued as ever. He hurried past the quiet houses, ignoring the distant coughs and the strained hush that lay over every door. When he burst into his own home, breathless, his heart clenched at the sight of Lily. She lay under a threadbare blanket, her face slick with sweat. Shallow, rapid breaths rattled her fragile chest, echoing in the cramped room. Gently placing his father's hammer near the door, Cole crossed the space in 3 strides.
Lily?
He said, his voice low and urgent.
I've got something, an alchemist's remedy. It should help.
She stirred at the sound of his voice, blinking blearily. The dark circles under her eyes had deepened, and her skin carried a greyish pallor, one of the physical signs people whispered about in connection to the plague. Cole's stomach knotted at the realization that she might have worsened in his absence. With careful hands, he uncorked the flask, the pungent odor of herbs filling the air.
This might taste terrible,
he warned, lifting her head to help her drink.
But it'll help you breathe.
Lily's lips parted, and she managed a few weak sips. Her expression twisted in distaste, but she swallowed obediently. Cole could practically feel the seconds stretching interminably as he waited for some sign of relief. The flickering oil lamp on the table cast jittery shadows on the walls, reflecting his inner turmoil.
Come on,
he whispered as Lily sank back onto the pillow.
Come on.
Cole wiped the sweat from Lily's brow with a damp cloth, noticing the feverish flush in her cheeks that mingled with the ashen undertones. He checked the bandage on her arm. A small scratch had turned an angry red days earlier. Though the remedy was meant to target her lungs and overall fever, he found himself hoping it might work miracles on everything else too. For a while, Lily's breathing remained shallow, and Cole felt a spike of panic. He forced himself to remain calm, recalling the alchemist's words. It's not immediate. Taking a steadying breath, he sat on the small stool beside her bed. He glanced at the mantel, where a small urn held his father's ashes. The faint orange lamplight danced over its surface. It looked so unassuming, an object of sorrow, yet also a symbol of solace. Unable to bear the swirl of hopelessness gripping his chest, Cole stood and walked to the urn.
Father,
he began, voice trembling.
I need your help. I don't know if you can even hear me. I couldn't save you when that accident happened. But Lily, she can't die too. I promised I'd come back for her, and I did.
His words faltered, and he closed his eyes. Memories of his father's forge, the steady ring of hammer on metal, the gentle way he'd ruffle Cole's hair when he praised him for a day's honest work, flooded his mind.
Please,
he whispered.
If there's anything of you still here, if there's any way, help her pull through.
The urn remained silent, of course, a mute reminder of a life once lived. Yet even speaking the plea aloud eased some of the crushing weight in Cole's chest. He exhaled shakily and turned back to Lily. A small moan escaped her lips as she shifted under the blanket, her brow slick with perspiration.
I'm here,
he told her softly, grabbing her hand.
I won't leave again. Not until you're well.
He slumped onto the stool, fatigue bearing down on his shoulders. The day's events, travelling to High Mill, discovering that bizarre flame and shard in the woods, hurriedly returning with the alchemist's remedy, felt like a fever dream. Perhaps the shard was simply a strange curiosity, or perhaps it meant something more. Right now, he couldn't find the energy to dwell on it. His gaze never wavered from Lily, who lay still, her breaths ragged. Time crawled in silent increments, each second filled with the faint crackle of the oil lamp. Cole barely noticed as his eyelids grew heavy, lulled by exhaustion and the flicker of hope that the remedy would take hold. Live, he willed her in his heart. Please, live.
If you enjoyed that chapter, the flame lives in you too. New chapters drop every Sunday and Thursday at noon. Subscribe to stay close to the fire and leave a comment. I want to know what you felt.
Ashes of the Last Dragon. Chapter 6. Shattered Hopes. Cole lost track of how long he'd paced the cramped interior of his home. The oil lamp on the table sputtered, its flame flickering off the rough walls in jagged shapes. Each time he glanced at Lily, lying under a thin blanket, his heart clutched as though caught in a vice. The remedy he'd forced her to swallow had yet to show any effect. Her laboured breaths cut the silence like a saw. He rubbed his temples, desperate thoughts churning. If only he hadn't wasted time. If he'd gone straight to the alchemist and come right back, Lily might be stable now. Instead, he had wandered into the woods after those strange ashes, chasing a nameless curiosity. He couldn't stop replaying the sequence in his head, the hours he'd lost, the moments he could never reclaim. Although the alchemist had been bundling the cure as he arrived to the shop, but his fear wouldn't allow him to forgive his choice. His eyes drifted to the small urn on the mantel.
Father,
he whispered, voice raw.
I should have been faster. Why'd I let myself get distracted?
No answer came from the silent clay container. Cole heard only Lily's weak coughing and the soft shuffle of his feet on the rough floor. A memory flickered unbidden. Lily, perched in the high branches of an apple tree when they were children, fearlessly dropping apples for him to catch. He saw her laughing in the sunlight, telling him to loosen up, to smile more. The warmth of that moment made the frigid reality now feel so much harsher. He sank onto a stool, clutching her pale hand.
Please,
he murmured, leaning close.
Stay with me.
Her eyelids fluttered, but she didn't respond. The hollowness in her cheeks seemed more pronounced by the hour, and a bluish hue darkened the skin around her eyes. The plague's hold was tightening. Cole cursed himself for every minute he'd spent gawking at that bizarre cold fire in the forest. He remembered the faint pulses of the shard he'd pried from the ash, a puzzle piece for a mystery, one that might have cost him Lily's life. A sudden, ragged exhale from Lily startled him. Her body tensed for a heartbeat. Then she stilled, her breath caught in a soft gasp. Cole lurched forward, gripping her shoulders.
Lily!
His voice trembled.
Lily!
She didn't answer. Her thin chest rose in one last feeble twitch and went still. Her eyes, half-lidded, stared at some distant point. An awful silence settled in the room, broken only by Cole's pounding heartbeat. He placed a trembling hand against her throat, searching for the faint flutter of a pulse. There was nothing. The stillness that enveloped him was worse than any roar or scream could have been. Lily, his only family left, had slipped away, right in front of him. Shock paralyzed him for a breathless second. Then a wave of grief crashed into his chest, and he let out a hoarse cry.
No! No, no!
Pulling her gently into his arms, he rocked her slack form, tears burning his eyes. He had sworn he wouldn't fail her. He had promised he would be back in time. But she was gone. In that blur of anguish, he caught sight of a dull gleam at the edge of his cloak. The shard. His hands shook as he drew it out. Something cold and lifeless about the shard mocked him. It lay there, heavy and unfeeling, despite what it had cost.
If I hadn't gone,
he rasped, pressing his forehead to Lily's.
Just a few more minutes, Lily would still be alive.
His tears splashed onto the shard's dark surface. In a surge of despair and rage, he set Lily gently down and jumped to his feet, clutching the shard in his fist.
You took me away from her,
he hissed through gritted teeth, tears still streaking his cheeks.
I hate you. I hate this.
Cole didn't fully understand the object's power or origin, but he knew, without a doubt, it was the reason he hadn't made it back in time. With every ounce of bitterness and regret, he squeezed his hand closed. A crack like shattered glass rang out, and slivers bit into his palm. A sudden rush of cool energy lanced up his arm, freezing him in place. The room seemed to darken, as if a silent wind blew out the lamp. He felt a force coiling in his chest, a nameless surge that snapped across his nerves and pulsed against his temples. For a split second, he heard nothing but his own heartbeat, impossibly loud in his ears. Then the shard's fragments glowed an eerie blue-black in his clenched fist, before disintegrating into a swirl of fine ash. Cole stumbled, pressing his free hand to his forehead. It was like a door in his mind had been thrown open, and cold air rushed in. His vision blurred. For an instant, he thought he saw faint wisps of dark flame flickering at the edges of his sight, curling like ghostly tendrils. A sense of presence hovered just beyond comprehension. Something new had awakened, and it crowded his every thought.
What?
Cole gasped, dropping to one knee. The swirling ash dissipated in the lamplight, as if it had never existed, yet he felt it coursing through him, an undercurrent of potent strength laced with an icy dread. It was all so wrong, so hollow, especially with Lily's limp body lying just behind him. He knelt there, panting for what felt like an eternity. Grief tangled with shock, and he let out a strangled cry, half in mourning for Lily, half in panic at whatever he had just unleashed. There was no voice, no explanation, only the crushing weight of loss and a terrible sense that everything had changed. The shattered remains of the shard fell away from his hand, each tiny fragment dissolving as if consumed by invisible flames. His palm stung where the splinters had cut him, but it was nothing compared to the agony in his chest. Cole forced himself back to Lily's side, gathering her against him in a final embrace.
I'm sorry,
he whispered, voice breaking.
I would do anything to have you back.
In the cold hush of that moment, his father's urn loomed in his peripheral vision, still silent, still offering no miracle. Cole closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. The world had lost its light in the span of a few heartbeats, and though he could not yet grasp the nature of what was stirring inside him, one truth cut through the haze of grief. He would give anything to have Lily back, but that was a price no one could ever repay.
To support the growth of this book, subscribe and share it with someone who you think would enjoy a dark fantasy novel. Click like and the notification button to be the first to hear new chapters every Sunday and Thursday at noon, and leave a comment. Tell me what direction you would like the story to go.
Ashes of the Last Dragon, Chapter 7. Ash Dominion Forged. Cole knelt beside Lily's still form, his trembling hands stained with tears. The hush in the room was absolute, save for his ragged breaths. Through tear-blurred eyes, he stared at her pale face, desperately wishing he could turn back time. A part of him refused to accept that moments ago, she had drawn her final breath. Suddenly, a low, resonant voice echoed in his mind, clearer than any thought of his own.
Your grief is a fuel more potent than any flame. You have forged Ash Dominion.
Cole jolted upright, nearly dropping Lily in his shock of hearing the mysterious voice in his mind. Before he could speak, her body shimmered, the edges of her form dissolving into radiant motes of light. The air turned unnaturally still. The glow around Lily's fading form pulsed, once, twice, before her outline dissolved into countless golden grey motes. The tiny specks drifted, weightless, before drawing toward the urn in slow, deliberate spirals. The moment they touched the clay, a faint ripple spread over its surface, like ink dispersing in water. Then, just as quickly as it began, the glow vanished. Silence pressed in, thick and absolute. Cole staggered, reaching out instinctively, only to grasp at empty air. His pulse roared in his ears, drowning out the echoes of the voice thundered in his mind. She was gone.
No!
He cried, reaching out as her figure vanished before his eyes. The dancing flecks drifted across the small room and flowed seamlessly into the urn on the mantel. A brilliant gold radiance flared there for an instant, then winked out, leaving only stunned silence. His heart hammering, Cole scrambled to his feet and rushed to the urn.
Lily?
His voice shook, raw with grief and confusion.
What happened? Where did she go?
But the urn remained silent, ordinary looking again. Then the voice resounded in his head once more, a calm, ancient timbre that sent a chill through his bones.
Accepted. Your grief is a fuel more potent than any flame. You have forged Ash Dominion.
Cole pressed a hand to his forehead, reeling.
Who? What are you? Where is my sister?
A presence, vast and bitter, pooled at the corners of his consciousness.
I am the last dragon, or what remains of it. You have absorbed the power of my dark flame, born of a covenant with the Underworld Lord. The foundation of your abilities lies in that dark flame. But when you begged to save your sister at any cost, your grief allowed you to draw upon one of your future powers, Dark Infusion, far sooner than you should have. Through it, you inadvertently enchanted the urn. Thus, Ash Dominion was forged from your grief.
Cole's heart thundered. He glanced wildly at the urn, still expecting Lily to reappear.
Enchanted the urn, with my sister inside.
She is with you,
the dragon said, a note of finality underpinning its deep voice.
You asked for anything to have her back. By that vow, a bargain was struck. Your sorrow fueled an ability that was never meant to manifest so soon, binding her spirit to the urn where your father's ashes already rest.
A swirl of horror and desperate hope warred in Cole's mind. He laid a trembling hand on the urn's smooth surface.
But she's gone,
he rasped.
How does this help her live?
She is not truly gone,
the dragon answered.
Only held in stasis. Your grief made the urn a conduit for Ash Dominion. Keep the urn near, and in time, you may communicate with her, and your father's spirit as well. You have anchored them to the urn. Only time will tell how she will return, and at what price.
Cole closed his eyes, tears welling again.
You say it's a bargain, a pact. What do you want from me?
I was slain by humans,
the dragon replied, its voice darkening.
And my death unleashed the ashes that spread this plague across your lands. Even now, others are waking to strange abilities, though most do not realize the origin. When you swore you'd give anything for Lily, you bound yourself to fulfilling my quest for revenge. You will wield the dark flame. You will use the power of Ash Dominion, and you will see my vengeance done upon those who caused my demise.
Cole shook his head, anger and disbelief burning in his chest.
I never wanted any vengeance. I just wanted to save Lily.
A rumble seemed to vibrate through his mind.
Your words sealed the oath. You have taken my essence into you when you crushed the shard. You are tied to the dark flame, and now you wield Ash Dominion, a byproduct of your powerful grief. If you forsake this path, your sister's spirit, now bound in the urn, will fade. You alone carry the means to nurture her presence and perhaps restore her fully one day. My death caused her death. As such, my vengeance is your vengeance.
At this, Cole's breath caught. Restore her fully. It was a faint spark of impossible hope. He looked back at the urn, his hand still on it.
She's alive in there somehow. With Father?
Their souls reside together,
The dragon affirmed.
Only your agreement keeps her essence stable. Your borrowed dark infusion turned the urn into a vessel for Ash Dominion. It should have been a mere shadow of an ability, but your grief made it more potent than I ever anticipated.
Cole's voice came out as a strained whisper.
So this plague, your death caused it. And people are gaining powers because of you? Why is that?
The Underworld Lord and I forged a covenant.
The dragon explained.
I swore humanity would pay for hunting us to extinction. However, before I could fulfill my end of the deal, I was murdered. The power still within, my ashes spread chaos, granting some the power to destroy, while others are consumed by sickness. You, Cole, stand at the center of this storm. The fragment of my essence you crushed gave you the dark flame. Your vow of grief ignited Ash Dominion. Now you must see this vengeance through.
A shudder coursed through Cole. His mind was spinning, trying to piece together the impossible. He stared at the urn, longing to see Lily's face or hear her laugh. Eventually, he swallowed hard.
If I do this, if I follow your plan, you swear I can speak to her again?
With time and strength, yes,
The dragon answered.
Her spirit and your father's remain with you. In the pockets of Ash Dominion, you may visit them, but it will tax their energy. Do not expect them to appear at your whim. The path to fully restoring her is long, yet it is not wholly impossible.
Cole sank to his knees, shoulders trembling. The despair of losing Lily mixed with a warped relief that part of her might still be saved. But at what cost? He lifted his eyes, filled with tears.
I don't have a choice, do I?
You already chose when you offered anything to get her back.
The dragon's voice thrummed, neither gloating nor sympathetic.
Now, the world changes. My ashes awaken powers in many. Some will use them for gain, some for destruction. Stand among them, hone the dark flame, and spread our revenge upon those who destroyed me.
Cole pressed his palm against the urn, memories of Lily's bright smile stabbing at his heart. The knowledge that her soul was just beyond his reach solidified into a cold, desperate resolve.
All right,
he whispered, voice shaking.
I'll do it. Whatever it takes to keep her close, and maybe bring her back someday.
Silence lingered, as though the dragon was weighing his words. Then the presence stirred again, ancient and unyielding.
So be it. You hold the dark flame, now awakened, and Ash Dominion, fueled by your grief. Our covenant is set. Earn the strength to speak with your sister. And when the time comes, unleash that power against those who took everything from me.
A jagged sob tore from Cole's throat.
Fine,
he choked out.
I'll do it, but only for Lily.
He sensed a faint swirl of acknowledgement, a cold hush that felt like the dragon's grim satisfaction.
You will soon learn how to bend your new abilities to your will. Be ready, Cole. For once the world discovers the plague's powers, you will not be the only one changed by them.
In the suffocating quiet that followed, Cole rose shakily to his feet, resting his forehead against the urn.
Lily, Father, I won't fail you. Just hold on,
he whispered. A faint warmth pulsed through the clay under his fingertips, a reassurance that her spirit was indeed within. He stepped back, shoulders heavy with a burden he had never asked for. The flickering lamp cast wavering shadows across the room where Lily had died only a short time ago. Yet the reality of her spirit bound in the urn, the vow he had made, and this ominous voice in his head left him no doubt. His life had changed irrevocably. And as grief warred with the faintest shred of hope in his heart, Cole braced himself for the path ahead, guided by the dark flame pulsing within his soul. and the newly forged Ash Dominion that promised him a slim chance at reuniting with the family he had lost.
To help this story grow, subscribe and share it with someone who lives for dark fantasy. Tap like and hit the bell to catch new chapters every Sunday and Thursday at noon. And tell me in the comments, where do you want the ashes to fall next?
Ashes of the Last Dragon. Chapter 8. A Lingering Silence. Cole stood in the center of his dimly lit home, hardly aware that he was breathing. Every corner of the small room felt suffocatingly still, as though the air itself held its breath in the aftermath of Lily's final moments. His ears rang with the memory of her last rattling exhale, and though that sound had gone away, its echo refused to leave him. The silence weighed on him more than any shouted accusation or heartbreak ever could. His survey of the sparse furnishings was unsteady. The hearth that once glowed bright with a crackling fire now smouldered with only a few dull embers. The battered wooden table, where Lily had sat countless times to eat their meagre meals, bore a single pewter cup turned on its side. A ragged curtain hung limply by the bed, the very spot where she'd slipped away. He felt as though he should rush to her side and comfort her, but there was no one left to console. Lily was gone, her spirit somehow drawn into the urn, leaving only an empty echo in her place. A tremor seized his body, and he forced himself to walk slowly around the small house, revisiting each corner in a daze. Every step seemed to churn up memories that tangled him in grief. He saw Lily's laughter in the well-worn scrape marks on the floor from when they'd played indoor tag on rainy days. He saw Ms. Rosley's kindness in the neatly folded blankets she had once stacked in the corner, a gesture of warmth and compassion for a family not her own. He recalled his father's lessons at the forge, images of sparks flying in rhythmic arcs, of molten metal that glowed like miniature suns before it was hammered into shape. A pang cut through him at the thought of his mother, but he shoved it aside. He couldn't bear to remember her face right now, not when the house was already thick with sorrow. Dwelling on her absence would only drown him further in grief, a chain of anguish he felt too powerless to face. He blinked, fighting the rising swirl of bitterness and regret. His attention caught on the hammer lying against the wall, his father's hammer. It was a sturdy tool with a handle of polished oak, burnished dark by years of sweat and soot. The head bore faint scars from countless strikes in the forge, each dent a testament to labor and care that his father had once taken such pride in. Despite its weight, the hammer felt comfortable in Cole's hands, as though molded over time to fit his grip. He'd brought it everywhere since his father died, but only now did he truly sense how it might be his sole companion. He ran a thumb along the handle's smoothed edges, recalling the day his father had shown him how to properly swing it. Keep his wrist straight, feel the momentum. He remembered the broad grin that split his father's face when Cole managed to land a perfect strike. That grin had been genuine pride. Now, cradling the hammer, Cole felt an ache twist through his chest. A house once filled with voices had shrunk into a single heartbeat, his own. He set the hammer beside the door, swallowing back tears. He had to prepare himself. The dragon's voice still lurked in the back of his mind, its presence neither comforting nor entirely menacing. It was simply there, a reality he couldn't escape any more than he could escape the fact that Lily was gone. Night rolled over Farewell, and with it came the suffocating darkness of a place already steeped in fear. Cole stepped outside, unsure what he expected. The moon was veiled by thick clouds, and no lamplight flickered along the street. Yet something felt off. He could see, not dim outlines or vague shapes, but details. The houses looked washed in shades of black and deep, swirling blues, as though the darkness itself cast a soft luminescence. He blinked hard, thinking his eyes must be playing tricks. Still, the muddy roadway stretched before him in startling clarity, each stone and puddle visible where there should have been only shadows. The stables across the way were painted in varying degrees of charcoal, and the barrels stacked beside them glimmered faintly with an inky sheen. His breath caught in his throat at the realization. He was seeing in the pitch of night just as plainly as he might at noon, but the colors were all wrong, replaced by a tapestry of black and blue.
Dark vision,
the dragon's voice murmured into his mind. Its tones vibrated with a subdued power that made Cole feel strangely electric.
You can perceive the absence of light, see it as a landscape of deep color. This is just one facet of your dark flame.
Cole's heart hammered.
How is this possible?
He asked aloud, though he wasn't certain if he expected an answer.
There is more to explain,
the dragon replied, each syllable echoing with a distant rumble.
But you are exhausted. Your grief clouds your thoughts. Rest eventually, and you will grasp the full extent of what has awakened. For now, take what you need from this place. You cannot stay here.
Cole looked back at the weathered doorway of his home. He could still make out the shape of his father's blacksmith crest, hanging crookedly above the threshold. This house was all he had known, a fragile sanctuary in a world gone mad with plague. But that sanctuary was empty now, haunted by ghosts he could not lay to rest. He closed his eyes, fighting against the swell of sorrow.
I won't come back,
he whispered to no one and to everyone. Father, Lily, perhaps Ms. Rosley. The notion of leaving it all behind felt like cutting away the last tether of his old life. Still, the dragon's words in his head echoed with an undeniable clarity. Lily's spirit was bound to the urn. If he wanted answers or any hope of saving what remained of her, he had to leave. A slow, trembling exhale escaped him. He glanced around the stillness of Farewell in these unsettling dark blue tones, the ghost-like outlines of houses and silent windows. A pang of guilt gnawed at him. He'd been awake and on the move for too many hours, consumed by the urgency of finding Lily's cure, only to fail her in the end. Now, he needed rest so he could understand what was happening. But the idea of lying down in this silent tomb of a house chilled him. Pressing his lips together, Cole turned back inside, stepping carefully over the threshold, as though crossing from one reality into another. The difference in lighting disoriented him. The moment he entered the house, he saw its interior cloaked in natural shadow, his strange vision only accentuating the faint candle glow that had burned low beside Lily's empty bed. He set the hammer down near the door and let his eyes linger on the urn.
I can't stay,
he murmured, voice catching.
Not with Lily. Not like this.
The sorrow in his chest twisted again at the thought of her final moments, but exhaustion weighed on him too heavily for tears. He trudged toward the edge of the bed. This was the same coarse mattress Lily had gasped and coughed on during her last hours of life. The blanket was still there, a silent testimony to how he had lost her. But there was nowhere else to go, and the dragon's voice, distant now, echoed a single command: rest. With a trembling sigh, Cole sat down. His limbs shook from weariness, from grief, and from the shock of the new power coursing beneath his skin. It felt wrong, too big for him, too alien. He curled onto his side, drawing the blanket up around his shoulders. The pillow was still damp with sorrow and smelled vaguely of bitter herbs. His father's hammer sat close by, within easy reach. Even now, its presence reminded him of the forge's warmth, of a steadiness he sorely needed. The silence wrapped him like a suffocating blanket. No one called his name. No one offered comfort. Only that faint candle glow remained, flickering weakly against the walls. His eyes threatened to close, but his mind struggled against oblivion, looping thoughts of Lily's laughter, Ms. Rosley's gentle reassurance, his father's solid guidance. He refused to think about his mother. That door led to a darker pain he couldn't withstand right now. At last, weariness claimed him. His muscles unwound fractionally, and he felt the tense ache in his chest loosen just enough for him to breathe a little deeper. Sleep teased the edges of his consciousness, offering a brief respite from the sorrow and the new uncertainties. He forced out one final whispered promise to no one in particular, perhaps Lily or the father he still longed to please.
I'll leave before dawn. I swear I won't waste what little time I have left.
And with that, the last of his strength ebbed. The hush inside the house remained unbroken. No voice but his own breath in the darkness, and not even the dragon spoke anymore. Cole drifted off, unable to shake the feeling that the world had shifted profoundly around him. But for now, in the depths of exhaustion, he could only wait for sleep to momentarily shield him from the crushing weight of sorrow.
Ashes of the Last Dragon, a dark fantasy by Kevin Harger. The deeper you go, the darker it burns. Subscribe now and step further into the fire.
Ashes of the Last Dragon, Chapter 9, Accusations in the Night. When the hard rap on the door came, he almost didn't register it. A second, louder knock jolted him upright. Heart pounding, he staggered to his feet.
Cole?
Came a familiar voice. He froze. Ms. Rosley. She had been Lily's friend and caretaker in many ways, checking on her whenever possible, offering what little comfort she could. The door opened before he could respond, revealing Ms. Rosley's worried face. She paused, taking in the scene, Cole steadying himself beside Lily's abandoned bed, a hollow air gripping the cramped room. Her expression hardened.
Cole?
She repeated, tone tight.
Where is Lily?
Her eyes darted around, searching for Lily's frail form. But the bed was empty, only rumpled blankets and the lingering smell of sickness. Cole's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. A swirl of reality had crashed down on him, cold and unforgiving. The understanding of Ms. Rosley's perceptions settled over him like a tightening noose. He realized the implications, and shock stilled his tongue.
Cole!
Ms. Rosley said again, voice quavering.
I saw you return with that remedy. I was sure it'd help. She was weak, yes, but she couldn't even stand. So, how...
She stopped, lips pressed into a thin line. Cole felt the unspoken accusations piling up. If Lily couldn't walk, how could she have disappeared? His silence seemed to confirm her darkest suspicions. He croaked, but words failed him. How could he explain the impossible? Miss Rosley's gaze flicked to the urn on the table, then back to Cole's haunted eyes. She drew a sharp breath, clearly torn between fear and pity.
Cole, what happened here?
Before he could attempt an answer, a shrill scream tore through the night, followed by another, then several more. The sound gripped them both, primal and filled with a terror that sent a chill down Cole's spine. Ms. Rosley turned, eyes wide.
Gods above.
Another distant shriek echoed through the shuttered streets. She glanced back at Cole, expression torn.
Stay here,
she commanded, voice quivering.
I'll see what's happening.
She bolted from the house, leaving the door half open. Cole stood there, trembling, the flickering lamp casting his wavering shadow on the wall. Silence returned, broken only by faint shouts outside. His mind spun. Screams. A monster? Another victim of the plague? Fear clutched at his heart. Then quietly, a different voice intruded.
She will return soon,
the dragon's voice murmured in his thoughts, resonant and cold.
But not alone. Fear will guide her. She'll bring others.
Cole's breath caught. Surely not.
Ms. Rosley knows I wouldn't hurt Lily.
But the doubt gnawed at him. The dragon's voice sank deeper, each syllable laced with ancient authority.
She does not need to believe you guilty. Others will decide. They will see a missing girl, an empty bed, and you with no explanation. Fear moves faster than truth.
His pulse thundered. They'd hang me. Or worse. The plague was a mystery. People were desperate for a culprit. Lily's disappearance could be pinned on him in a heartbeat. He swallowed, dread stirring in his veins.
I have to leave,
he murmured, hating himself for the cowardice, yet seeing no other option. His gaze swept the cramped interior one last time. He grabbed what he needed. The urn, carefully wrapped. A small satchel with meager supplies. His father's hammer. Tears burned in his eyes. He was abandoning his only home, turning his back on the bed where Lily had once laughed. But the dragon's warnings rang true. Humans feared what they couldn't explain, and this was certainly inexplicable. With trembling resolve, Cole stepped into the well-lit dark of night, pulling the door shut behind him. The lamp's glow died with a soft clink, casting the house in darkness that would only be visible by Cole if he were to take a last look. Farther down the street, a handful of villagers ran toward the screams, torches flickering against the black sky. Others, faces drawn, were fleeing in the opposite direction. Chaos, confusion, and Cole slipping away in the shadows. It felt as though he were leaving his heart behind with every step.
If you enjoyed that chapter, the flame lives in you too. New chapters drop every Sunday and Thursday at noon. Subscribe to stay close to the fire and leave a comment. I want to know what you felt.
Ashes of the Last Dragon. Chapter 10. The Flight from Farewell. Cole stood in the narrow alley behind his home, heart hammering in his chest. Hours ago, only hours though it felt like a lifetime, he had returned with a cure for Lily, only to lose her anyway. The night pressed down, unusually dark, but he found he could see shapes in deep layers of black and blue. Walls that should have been hidden were highlighted in midnight tones, and even distant fence lines shimmered with a faint, ghostly edge. His dark vision showed him every narrow passage and shadowed doorway, letting him skirt around corners where moonlight would otherwise fail him. A faint clamor drifted from the village center, shouted voices, the crackle of torches, and fearful murmurs echoing between the timber-framed houses. Those eerie screams he'd heard earlier still rattled in his mind, mingling with Ms. Rosley's accusation-laden eyes. He steeled himself, scanning the darkness for movement. Townsfolk clutched at one another and formed ragged search parties, while others cowered behind bolted shutters. Every face seemed stricken with a dread that churned Cole's stomach. He crouched behind a stack of empty crates, pressing himself against the damp wood. A group of villagers passed by, their torchlight casting jittery patterns on the ground. He saw them clearly, even when their torches bobbed out of his line of sight. His vision made them stand out in swirling dark silhouettes. His pulse fluttered. He had never imagined seeing so clearly at night. Yet here he was, forced to rely on this eerie gift to remain hidden. Their voices carried in sharp bursts.
I heard someone was attacked.
By what?
No idea. Some foulness from the plague?
Stay together.
Cole swallowed. He couldn't forget the fleeting glimpses of Lily's final minutes, or Ms. Rosley's horrified expression upon finding her gone. Grief twisted inside him, every beat of his heart reminding him that he had failed. Then the dragon's voice coiled through his thoughts, low and decisive.
You cannot help them,
it murmured.
They will fear you more than any creature they cannot name.
He clenched his jaw, remembering how Ms. Rosley's face had hardened. Fear could turn reasonable people into a mob. If they thought he had harmed Lily. He tightened his grip on the small bundle under his arm, the urn wrapped in cloth, and forced himself to move on. Navigating Farewell under the cloak of night felt surreal. Streets he had walked countless times now glimmered in inky, shifting tones. Past festival days flashed through his mind, bright banners strung along these very lanes, Lily laughing as she tugged him from one booth to another, the smell of roasted apples mingling with the clang of blacksmith hammers. His father had once sold crafted nails and hinges at the village fair, proud of his craftsmanship. Now, those happy scenes felt a world away. Lily, he whispered, throat tightening. A lifetime's worth of memories warred with the harsh reality that he would never see her smile again.
Do not dwell,
the dragon interjected.
We must go. You carry her spirit. Remember that. The longer you remain, the greater the chance someone will blame you for what they do not understand.
Cole's breath shuddered. The vow binding Lily's spirit to the urn was as real to him as the hammer swinging at his waist. With one last glance at the crooked rooftops, he slipped onto a narrower side street. The swirling black and blue sheen of his dark vision let him spot a scuttling figure, a neighbor perhaps, darting behind a cart. He waited, still as stone, until the footfalls faded before moving on. Rounding a corner, he nearly collided with a trio of villagers stumbling from the direction of the screams. Their voices trembled with half-caught phrases of
unholy beast
and
dark omens.
Cole dodged behind a battered rain barrel, pressing himself low, mindful of any sound. His heart thundered in his ears. If they saw him now, if they recognized him or wondered why he was skulking about, he wouldn't be able to explain Lily's disappearance without inviting suspicion. Another frantic group passed. He could smell sweat and fear on them. Words like
strange beast
and
demons
hung in the air, fueling the dread that already choked the streets. Every stray echo reminded him how quickly terror spread. Once the murmurs died, he pushed away from the barrel and crept through a gap in the crumbling village wall. He paused at the outskirts, chest tight. Clusters of farmhouses dotted the moonlit fields, but they too lay silent and shadowy. Stepping beyond Farewell's boundary felt final, like walking off a cliff into the unknown. Guilt and regret vied with a prickling sense of relief. He was free of prying eyes. But that freedom came at a price. He glanced back at the place he had once called home, recalling the worn cobblestone streets and the gentle hum of daily life. His father's forge had filled the mornings with the ring of metal on metal, and Lily's voice had breathed warmth into every lonely corner. Now, nothing remained for him there but memories and potential condemnation. A faint breeze tugged at his hair, whispering against his ear. He reminded himself that Ms. Rosley had seen him and the empty bed. She might be explaining that to others even now. Already, he pictured them turning fearful eyes his way, painting him as a murderer or a menace.
Keep moving,
the dragon commanded, quiet but insistent.
We cannot linger. Oaksford lies to the east. The rumors of those ashes.
Cole nodded without waiting for the dragon to finish. He was exhausted, but adrenaline still buzzed through his veins, feeding him just enough energy to push forward. Oaksford. He had heard the name whispered by travelers who claimed the plague was far worse there. Maybe that was where he would find answers about the dragon's ashes, and about the unknown slayer who ended the dragon's life in the first place. His mind drifted to the hammered metal of his father's old tool. It bumped lightly against his leg as he walked, each dull tap a reminder of the simple blacksmithing world he had lost. He had loved that world. The steady heat of the forge, the sweat-soaked satisfaction of shaping metal, the sense of belonging with his father and Lily close by. But it was gone now, and something darker had replaced it. He took a final hollow look at Farewell's rooftops, cast in deep navy and ebony under his unnatural sight. Then he turned away, forging into the night with the urn clutched close. Tears threatened to blur his vision, but the dragon's voice burned in his mind, holding him to a course he scarcely understood. Step by step, Cole crossed the farmland perimeter and set foot on a winding path that led away from Farewell. After all that had transpired, there could be no return. The hush of the fields embraced him, broken only by the staccato beat of his pulse. Soon, the shapes of the village sank behind the rolling land, and he found himself alone in the darkness, guided by black and blue outlines only he could see. He did not know where the path would ultimately lead, only that it was away from the people he might endanger and the home he could no longer face. With each stride, the bond to Farewell frayed further, until all that remained was a cold determination to keep going. The dragon nudged his mind, prodding him gently eastward toward Oaksford, where rumours spoke of heavier plague ash and secrets tied to the last dragon's demise. Cole inhaled a shaky breath and tightened his grip on the urn. Lily was gone, but her spirit was with him. He could feel it, even if he couldn't fully comprehend how. The memory of her laughter flickered behind his eyes. It had been only a few hours since he lost her, yet it felt like an eternity. He stepped deeper into the night, letting the darkness guide him wherever it might lead. There was no point in looking back.
To support the growth of this book, subscribe and share it with someone who you think would enjoy a dark fantasy novel. Click like and the notification button to be the first to hear new chapters every Sunday and Thursday at noon, and leave a comment. Tell me what direction you would like the story to go.
Ashes of the Last Dragon. Chapter 11. The Cursed Forest. Cole trudged along a narrow, overgrown path until it dissolved into patches of wild grass and tangled shrubs. The night still held firm over the landscape, but the horizon had begun to change, its deepest black now touched with a faint grey that hinted at the distant approach of morning. Hours had passed since he fled Farewell, and his limbs ached from fatigue and tension. Ahead, a looming wall of ancient trees rose against the sky like crooked teeth. Even in the low light, Cole saw the timber trunks distorted into twisted shapes. Thick branches interlocked overhead to form a canopy so dense it threatened to blot out any hope of daylight. He felt a chill skitter along his spine. There were enough stories and rumours about these woods to warn any sensible traveller away. Yet here he was, standing at the threshold of what many in Farewell whispered to be a cursed forest. Its sinister reputation clung to every branch and vine. Cole slowed, pressing a hand to the stitch in his side, and let his eyes drift over the tangled undergrowth. The first glimmers of his dark vision manifested in shimmering strands of midnight blue around tree trunks, revealing details he wouldn't have otherwise seen. Bark blackened in patches, heavy knots bulging like tumorous growths, and pale vines looping among skeletal underbrush. An unsettling hush pressed in, replacing the normal nighttime chorus of crickets or distant owls with a silence that crackled with tension.
It's quiet,
Cole muttered under his breath, peering past the gnarled roots. He realized he couldn't spot a single bird perched in the branches, nor hear any small creature rustling through the leaves. The gloom of the place felt absolute. A soft vibration brushed his thoughts.
The land itself is corrupted here,
the dragon's voice said, low and resonant. Cole paused, unsure if he dared speak out loud lest he attract unwanted attention. Instead, he gave a slight, involuntary nod. He couldn't pinpoint what corrupted truly meant, but the evidence lay all around him. Sagging shrubs with leaves ashen in colour, thick vines twisted together like barbed wire, and a faint odour of decay that clung to the stagnant air. Stepping inside the forest was like crossing a threshold from one world into another. Almost immediately, the tangle of branches overhead choked off what little light remained. His dark vision intensified, painting every rock, twisted trunk, and patch of dead grass in swirling shades of blue-black. Columns of wood loomed on all sides, shapes coiling in the corners of his sight. He realized with a jolt just how vital this strange power had become. Without it, he would have been blindly stumbling into brambles and fallen logs. Cole gripped his father's hammer tighter at his hip. He tried to stay on the remnants of a path, any sign of a trail, but the forest floor was a maze of gnarled roots and scattered debris. At times, the undergrowth seemed to thicken deliberately, as though resisting his presence. When it snagged the edge of his cloak, he had to tug hard to free himself, each small movement feeling magnified in the hush. Every so often, his footstep would land with a crack on a dead branch, echoing ominously through the silent trees. The noise set his nerves on edge, reminding him of Lily's final moments and the emptiness her death had left. He caught himself wishing she was still at home, safe. But then, home no longer existed in the same way. He clenched his jaw to block the surge of grief. The forest's quiet threatened to drag every memory to the surface, but he couldn't let himself fall apart here. Time became hard to gauge under the dense canopy. It was still dark, but whether a few minutes or a full hour had passed since entering, he couldn't say. His legs felt leaden, protesting each step, yet he pressed on. Occasional hints of the dragon's presence stirred at the edges of his thoughts, guiding him around especially thick clusters of fallen timber, or pointing out a gap between twisted roots. Without that subtle nudge, he might have circled hopelessly in the same spot. He paused at a small clearing where the canopy opened just enough to reveal patches of sky, still dark with only the barest suggestion of approaching dawn. A shiver lanced through him as he noticed the rotting husk of a tree leaning drunkenly to one side. Beneath it, a mass of blackened vines lay coiled, and something glistened dully in the darkness, a sticky residue or slime. He didn't dare step closer to investigate. A sudden impression of being watched crept over him, the hairs at the back of his neck prickling. He glanced around, dark vision painting every stump and bush in inky contrasts. Nothing looked overtly alive, yet the feeling persisted. Each time he tried to focus, the shapes of the forest seemed to blur at the edges of his sight. His pulse quickened. He forced his mind to the path ahead, if it could be called a path at all. He had no map, no real idea of how large these woods were, only the certainty that Oaksford lay beyond. The memory of Lily's final breath latched onto him again, fueling his determination to keep moving. There would be answers somewhere past this cursed place, even if that meant pushing himself beyond all comfort. A muffled clack echoed behind him, like wood striking wood. Cole swung around, hammer half drawn, scanning the gloom. The forest stood still as ever, but cold dread seeped through his veins. His muscles tensed, anticipating movement that never came. He started forward again, trying to silence the pounding of his heart. The thick scent of decay clung to his nostrils, and his boots sank into layers of decomposing leaves. Now and then, he glimpsed faint scratches on tree trunks or twisted footprints in the mud, as though creatures with taloned feet had passed by. A sour taste filled his mouth, but he pressed onward, feeling every throb of exhaustion in his bones. Eventually, a series of distant, distorted howls resonated from deep within the forest. They were high-pitched, more like ragged shrieks than any common animal cry. Cole halted, breath held, ears straining. The howls floated through the silent canopy, and then subsided into echoing nothingness. His heart thumped so loudly that he half expected the dragon to command him to run. Instead, the dragon's voice slid into his mind, softer than before.
We must continue. If you stop, the darkness of this place will find you.
Cole bit his lip. That single phrase disturbed him more than anything else he'd heard. Raking a hand through his hair, he forced one step, then another. Each motion felt precarious, as though stepping too loudly would invite something dreadful out of the shadows. Even the trunk of a felled oak, covered in creeping vines, looked like a colossal carcass in the gloom. No matter how many times he blinked, the swirling blue-black outlines never lost their haunting clarity. The power that once seemed so foreign now served as his lifeline, guiding him through labyrinthine undergrowth. Sweat beaded at his temples despite the chill in the air, and a fleeting wave of nausea swelled in his stomach. The tension was relentless. Still, Cole found a morbid sort of comfort in that hush. Lily's memory haunted him, but trudging through the cursed forest left little room for him to wallow. Survival demanded his focus. He felt a pang in his chest as he thought of Lily's bright eyes and the way she used to tease him for being so serious. Pressing the sorrow down, he reminded himself, Lily's spirit was bound in the urn. He still carried her in some form, even if he hardly understood how. The howls drifted through the trees again, this time echoing off to his left. Cole's gaze cut in that direction, but he couldn't see any movement. All he observed were black trunks and withered shrubs splayed in nightmarish shapes. Determination solidified in his chest. He wouldn't turn back. He forged ahead, gripping his father's hammer so tightly that his knuckles burned. If anything lurked in the trees, he had to be ready. Dawn remained distant, no comforting light yet slicing through the canopy. Each step took him deeper into a world that felt forsaken by any spark of hope. But to stop was unthinkable. He refused to be paralyzed by fear. In that oppressive darkness, with the faint glimmer of sky concealed by branches, Cole pressed on. The forest offered no reassurance, only skeletal trees and a silence that threatened to devour his resolve. Yet he continued, every rattling breath and hammering heartbeat reminding him that he had lost Lily once. He would not lose himself too, no matter what horrors awaited in these cursed woods.
To help this story grow, subscribe and share it with someone who lives for dark fantasy. Tap like and hit the bell to catch new chapters every Sunday and Thursday at noon. And tell me in the comments, where do you want the ashes to fall next?
Ashes of the Last Dragon, Chapter 12, The First Kill. Cole wove his way deeper into the twisted woods, each step an ordeal against exhaustion and the maze of knotted roots. Night still clung stubbornly to the forest, but a faint greying of the sky hinted that dawn lurked beyond the horizon. His lungs burned and his legs threatened to fold beneath him, but he refused to stop. Something about these ancient, warped trees felt alive with malice, as if the bark itself harbored silent judgment. He paused to catch his breath, letting his dark vision wash over the gloom. Everything became a patchwork of black and deep blues. Then, movement, small at first, then erupting into a frenzied blur. An elongated, segmented body scuttled across the leaves, far larger than any insect had the right to be. His stomach lurched. The thing moved too fast and too deliberately to be some harmless forest creature. Before he could blink, it lunged. It twisted in midair like a grotesque earwig the size of a dog, half-rotted flesh dangling from its shell-like segments. Overlong mandibles dripped with black saliva, and bizarre patterns of dark magic pulsed along its carapace. A hiss, low and unnatural, shattered the hush. Fear stabbed through Cole, but with the fear came something else. Power.
A creature of the underworld, Lord.
The dragon's voice flared in Cole's mind.
Slay it, and you will grow stronger.
He had no time to question. A surge of energy burned through his muscles, making them feel tighter, quicker. The weight of sleepless days momentarily vanished. His hammer, his father's hammer, felt almost weightless in his hand. As the monstrous earwig scuttled forward, Cole's heart thundered with equal parts terror and exhilaration. The abominations sprang, jaws unhinging to reveal jagged, scythe-like mandibles. Cole swung the hammer with every ounce of strength he had, colliding with the creature's flank in a thunderous thud. He half expected it to split in two, but the thing merely screeched, rancid fluids oozing from newly cracked segments. Its hiss mutated into a shrill shriek, limbs flailing for purchase, clicking like nails on bone. Cole leapt back, panting, eyes wide. His heart hammered so loudly he could barely think. He had never been in a real fight, never faced anything stronger than a stubborn farm animal. Yet somehow, his body moved with terrifying grace. He felt alive, in a way that transcended adrenaline. The force, it was energy from the shard. It had to be. It danced beneath his skin, fueling him with stolen vigor. The monstrous earwig recoiled, ichor drooling from its cracked shell. Then it charged again, too many legs skittering in a nauseating blur. Cole braced himself, but even with his newfound speed, it was horrifyingly fast. A hooked limb lashed out, slicing past his shoulder. Pain seared him. He bit back a cry, swinging in retaliation. The hammer connected with a sickening crunch, this time embedding deeper, shattering the beast's plated exoskeleton. Vile fluid spattered, glinting black in his dark vision.
Keep going,
the dragon urged.
Finish it.
Cole staggered but obeyed the roar in his head. He raised the hammer high and brought it down with desperate strength. Crack! The monster bucked, screeching so loudly his ears rang. Another blow. Crack! Segments caved under the repeated strikes. With each impact, lumps of rotting flesh and shell flew in all directions. Cole's stomach churned at the gore, but he couldn't let himself stop. The beast flailed, half of its body ruined, yet it still tried to drag itself toward him, jaws snapping. In his entire life, Cole had never killed anything bigger than a rat. Now he was drenched in the spray of black fluid, forcing himself to keep hitting this abomination until it stopped moving. One last swing of the hammer crushed its head, an explosion of cartilage and withered tissue. The creature spasmed, shriek sputtering into silence. Cole stumbled back, hammer clutched in shaking hands. Nausea twisted in his gut. For a moment, all he could hear was his own ragged breathing. The monstrous corpse twitched and then, unbelievably, started to bubble, as if sizzling from within. It collapsed into itself, dissolving into a boiling patch of blackish ash. Blood roared in Cole's ears. He'd fought for his life and won. But the victory felt hollow, overshadowed by the shock of what he'd just done. His hands trembled with the realization that he had truly killed something that should never have existed.
Your flame devours the fallen,
The dragon growled, satisfaction seething in its tone.
You have been rewarded.
Heat burned in Cole's veins, a raw, unsettling rush that kept exhaustion at bay. He wiped cold sweat from his brow with a trembling forearm, hammer still dripping with congealed slime. The forest around him felt even more oppressive, as if the trees themselves recoiled at what he'd done. Gulping for air, he forced himself to move. More horrors could lurk behind every trunk. His legs, still unsteady, carried him onward at a near run. Shadows blurred past, each warped trunk glowing faintly with his dark vision. The monstrous earwig's final screech echoed in his mind, haunting him. He couldn't tell how long he sprinted, only that the color of the sky gradually brightened from a starless indigo to a pale grey. Every muscle ached, his wound at the shoulder pulsed with hot pain, and his lungs stung with every breath. At last, he emerged from the worst of the brambles and gnarled roots, stumbling into a section of the woods where the trees stood taller and the undergrowth thinned. No longer tangled in the claustrophobic mass of vines, he could see farther between the trunks, though their looming silhouettes still pressed in on all sides. Dawn's first weak glow threaded through the canopy, a muted pink that cast wavering shadows on the mossy ground. He nearly went sprawling into a patch of wet leaves, his heart hammering from the battle's aftermath. A flicker of relief coursed through him. He'd left the densest, most cursed expanse behind. But as he glanced over his shoulder, the memory of twisted branches and feral shapes gnawed at his nerves. He was still in these haunted woods, only in a sparser stretch where the paths looked marginally clearer. The knot in his stomach refused to loosen, as though the forest might reach out with hungry limbs, dragging him back into that dark tangle of nightmares. And there was still a long way to go before he'd be free of it entirely. As he struggled for composure, a familiar voice called his name.
Cole?
His muscles tensed, hammer instinctively rising, until he recognized the figure stepping out from behind a ragged hedgerow, Ms. Rosley. She looked as disheveled and frightened as he felt, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. He almost didn't believe the sight. Someone from Farewell here.
How did you get here so fast?
She approached carefully, hands partway raised.
I must have taken another path.
She explained shakily, eyeing the forest behind him.
There are many paths of entry to these woods. I heard screams in town, saw monstrous things I can't explain. I tried to get help, but then you weren't home. You vanished, Cole.
Her voice cracked.
I realized I have no one left in Farewell. No family. I thought maybe you'd head to Oaksford for answers. I gathered what I needed for the journey to meet you there.
Cole swallowed. His shoulders still trembled with leftover adrenaline.
I'm sorry,
he whispered.
You shouldn't have come.
He stopped, noticing the blood caked on his arm and the ugly gash where the creature's limb had sliced him. Her gaze followed his, face twisting in concern.
What happened?
He could barely force words out, so he told her fragments. How he'd fled Farewell in panic, the monstrosity that attacked him in the forest, and how he barely survived. He couldn't bring himself to detail the shard of high mill wood or the strange surge of power. When he reached the part about Lily, how her final breath slipped away, how he believed something beyond mortal comprehension had taken her, Ms. Rosley visibly shuddered.
I don't know what to believe anymore,
she said, voice thin.
But I saw an abomination tear through a house in Farewell. That's why I ran. If that's real, then your story is surely possible.
She let out a shaky laugh, hollow.
We might both be losing our minds.
A weary silence stretched as far as the mind could see. Ms. Rosley regarded him for a moment before saying,
Look, I've no reason to go back. If I stay in Farewell, I'll just be burying bodies. I want to travel with you, if you'll have me.
Cole hesitated. Lily's death still throbbed like an open wound in his chest, and Ms. Rosley, once suspicious of him, now asked for his help. But in truth, he couldn't deny a flicker of relief at not being alone anymore.
We can stick together for now, but I'm not sure where my journey ends,
he replied, voice still rough.
For now, let's find someplace safe to rest, Ms. Rosley. I will tell you everything I know when we get some rest.
A faint, almost grateful smile touched Ms. Rosley's lips, though her eyes remained clouded with grief.
Thank you. And call me Kate,
she added softly, as though shedding her old identity.
I'm not your sitter anymore, Cole.
Cole nodded, something in his chest loosening ever so slightly.
Kate,
he echoed, rolling the name on his tongue. Then he forced himself into motion.
Come on, we can't stay in the part of the forest.
They walked side by side, battered and uncertain, but no longer completely alone. The sun's first rays began to peek through the leaves in the distance over the horizon, a soft light that felt surreal after all the darkness. Cole wiped at the spattered blood on his cheek, flinching at the memory of that final, awful crunch of bone and exoskeleton. He suspected the horrors were far from over. Yet as they trudged onward, something like determination flickered in his chest. He had faced his first kill, a monstrous, abominable thing, yes, but a life and death struggle all the same. The fact he'd survived ignited a strange, uneasy confidence. If the world was coming unhinged, perhaps this new power was the only way to stay alive.
Ashes of the Last Dragon, a dark fantasy by Kevin Harger. The deeper you go, the darker it burns. Subscribe now and step further into the fire.